You won't believe what happened that night. And to be honest, I still catch myself thinking about it every time I walk past that same hallway. But before I get into it, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? I love hearing from everyone. Whether you're tuning in from Texas, Ohio, maybe somewhere up in Michigan where the autumn leaves are already turning. And hey, if this kind of story feels a little too close to home, go ahead and subscribe. It helps me keep sharing pieces of life that remind us how complicated and beautiful it can be. Give this video a like too, if you've ever had one of those evenings where something small ended up changing the way you see yourself. All right, here we go. It was one of those evenings when the house felt too quiet, even though it wasn't empty. The clock above the kitchen sink kept ticking in that sharp, hollow way, and the smell of the chicken casserole I'd made for dinner still lingered in the air. My daughter, Emily, was upstairs finishing a project for her new job, and her boyfriend, Daniel, had offered to come by and help her with the presentation slides. He was a polite young man, the kind who still called me ma'am, even though I told him to stop doing that months ago. I liked Daniel. He was the steady kind, not loud, not too charming for his own good, but the kind who looked you in the eye when he spoke. At 59, I'd learned to notice that kind of sincerity. It's rare. They'd been upstairs for a while when I heard footsteps coming down. It was Daniel. He carried his laptop under one arm and looked a little uncertain, like he wasn't sure if he should leave just yet. "Emily's still working," he said, stopping in the hallway. "She told me to grab a drink while she finishes the last few slides." I nodded and told him to help himself. He thanked me, opened the refrigerator, and stood there for a second longer than most people would, like he wasn't really looking for anything to drink at all. When he closed the door, he turned back toward the hallway, but didn't move right away. He just stood there, one hand brushing the side of the doorframe, the other still holding his laptop. There was something about his expression, maybe tiredness, maybe thoughtfulness, that made me pause. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded, then hesitated. "Yeah, just long week." I smiled a little. I know the feeling. Something about that moment felt oddly suspended. The evening light coming through the window caught on the framed photos along the hallway, pictures of Emily through the years, braces, prom, graduation day. And there I was too, in each one, frozen in younger versions of myself. Daniel's eyes drifted over them, stopping once or twice before he spoke again. "She looks a lot like you," he said softly. I wasn't sure how to respond to that, so I laughed it off. "Poor girl," I said. He smiled, but not in a teasing way. It was quiet, genuine, almost gentle. "No, I mean, she gets that calm look from you, the kind that makes people feel safe." It's strange how such a simple comment can catch you off guard. At my age, compliments start to feel like old currency, something you stopped spending long ago. But his words, they didn't sound rehearsed or polite. They felt like observation, not flattery. Before I could say anything, the clock struck 9, and the chime echoed through the house. Daniel shifted his weight, still standing there, still holding his laptop. I noticed how the soft light fell across his face, the kind of tired, thoughtful look that doesn't belong to youth or age, just to a moment of honesty. "You can sit if you want," I said, motioning to the chair near the hallway table. "Emily will probably be another 10 minutes. He thanked me and sat down. For a moment we just listened, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the faint sound of Emily's voice upstairs. I don't know why, but something inside me stirred, not in a romantic way, but in that deeply human way you feel when someone else's presence fills an empty space you hadn't realized was there. He started talking about his parents, about how his mother used to stay up late helping him with school projects, just like Emily was doing now. There was a sincerity in his tone that pulled me in. He spoke with warmth, not just about his life, but about how small acts of care stay with you. I guess I just miss that kind of steadiness, he said. You know, when someone's there, not because they have to be, but because they want to. I nodded, feeling something tug in my chest. I knew exactly what he meant. After my husband passed 5 years ago, I'd become the reliable one for everyone else. Emily, my sister, even the neighbors, but rarely did anyone pause to notice that I still missed having that same steadiness for myself. We sat there, not saying much after that. Just two people caught in a quiet understanding that didn't need to be explained. The air between us wasn't heavy, but charged with something honest. The kind of silence that tells you both that life is fragile and connection, when it appears, is sacred. Emily's footsteps finally echoed down the stairs, breaking the spell. She smiled at us both, oblivious to the current that had passed through the air moments before. "Thanks for waiting, Daniel," she said. "I'm done now." He stood, smiling back. "No problem." When they left later, I stood by the door a moment longer than I should have. The hallway was empty again, quiet, but it felt different, like it had absorbed something of the conversation that had taken place there. I poured myself a glass of water, sat down at the kitchen table, and let the memories roll through me. There was no wrongdoing, no secret desire, just a strange sense of being seen, really seen, for the first time in a long while. That night, I didn't sleep easily. I kept thinking about how sometimes the most unexpected moments, the ones that sneak up on you between the ticking of a clock and a soft conversation, can make you rediscover parts of yourself you thought were gone forever. And that's where it began, the night my daughter's boyfriend stayed in the hallway too long. The next morning felt oddly lighter, though I couldn't quite tell why. Maybe it was the way the sunlight streamed through the curtains, painting thin lines across the floor, or maybe it was just the aftertaste of a good conversation, the kind that lingers, quietly reshaping how you feel about yourself. I made coffee the same way I always did, 2 scoops, 1 sugar, no cream, and sat by the window. Emily had already left for work, leaving behind her usual whirlwind of a morning. Half a piece of toast, a hairbrush on the counter, and a note on the fridge that said, "Love you, Mom." I smiled. She was a good kid. Independent, kind-hearted, maybe a little too trusting sometimes, but she got that from me. Still, I couldn't help but think about Daniel, not in the way people might assume, but in the way you think about someone who reminds you that life still has new corners to explore. I thought about the way he'd listened last night, really listened, without rushing to fill the silence. That kind of presence does something to you, especially when you've spent years getting used to empty rooms and one-sided conversations. That afternoon, Emily called. "Hey, Mom," she said, her voice bright. "Daniel's coming over again tonight. We're doing a trial run of my presentation before tomorrow. You'll be home, right?" "Of course," I said, trying to sound casual. "You two can use the dining room if you need the space." When they arrived, I was in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner. Daniel greeted me politely as always, but I noticed his smile lingered just a second longer. Emily was excited, talking a mile a minute about her project, and I could see how much he admired her enthusiasm. It made me proud and oddly protective. As they set up their laptops, I went about my business, pretending to focus on dinner. But I couldn't help catching bits of their conversation. Emily explaining things passionately, Daniel nodding, encouraging her. They made a good pair. After about an hour, Emily excused herself to take a call from her boss. Daniel stayed behind, tidying up the papers she'd scattered across the table. When he looked up, our eyes met again, that same quiet, steady look from the night before. "She's really talented," I said, breaking the silence. He smiled. "Yeah, she is. She's got this way of making people believe in her ideas." "That's something I never quite had," I admitted, half laughing. I was always better at keeping things running behind the scenes. You know, the quiet kind of work. He shook his head. "That kind of work is what keeps everything standing." I don't know what it was about that line. Maybe the sincerity, maybe the timing, but it hit deeper than I expected. At 59, you start to wonder if your quiet efforts ever really mattered. Hearing someone notice that they did, it's like taking a deep breath after years of shallow ones. We ended up talking again, just like before, this time about simpler things. Books, old movies, favorite recipes. He told me about growing up in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. I told him about the summer I spent learning to drive my father's old truck, stalling it every few minutes on the dirt road behind our house. It was easy, comfortable, like talking to someone who had no expectations of you. Emily returned after about 20 minutes, cheerful as ever. Dinner went smoothly, filled with laughter and conversation. But every so often, I caught Daniel's eyes flicker toward me, not with any hidden meaning, just with acknowledgement, as if to say, I see you there, too. After they left, I found myself cleaning up slowly, almost deliberately. The house felt alive again, though quieter now. There's a certain kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone, but from realizing you've stopped expecting anyone to really notice you. That feeling had been lifting, subtly, imperceptibly, since the night in the hallway. Over the next few days, life continued as usual. Emily got her promotion. I could hear her excitement echoing down the phone when she called me from work. Daniel texted her congratulations, then dropped by later that evening to celebrate with her. I tried to give them space, but I still caught their laughter drifting from the living room. It made me smile. Later that night, when Emily went upstairs to take a shower, Daniel lingered again in the hallway, helping me put away the leftover cake. You must be proud, he said. I am, I replied. She's worked hard. He nodded, wiping a crumb from the counter. She's lucky to have you. Not everyone has someone in their corner like that. I looked at him, wondering if he realized how rare it was for anyone to say something like that. Not just polite gratitude, but genuine recognition. For a moment, the air felt charged again. Not romantic, not forbidden, just deeply human. Two people, standing in the soft kitchen light, both understanding something unspoken. That life can surprise you with connection, even when you think you've already seen it all. When he finally said goodnight, I stood at the door again, watching the quiet stretch of the street outside. The night breeze carried the faint scent of lilacs from the garden. I breathed it in, feeling that same quiet fullness in my chest. It wasn't love. It wasn't longing. It was something gentler. The kind of feeling that makes you remember you're still capable of being moved, of feeling seen, of being part of a story that isn't quite over yet. And as I turned off the lights and climbed the stairs, I realized something. Sometimes life brings people into your orbit not to disrupt it, but to remind you that connection doesn't have to be complicated to be real. It just has to be honest. It had been about a week since that quiet evening in the kitchen, and life had slipped back into its usual rhythm. Or so it seemed. The days felt longer, the light outside more golden somehow, the air charged with the kind of awareness that comes when something inside you has quietly shifted. I went about my chores, visited the grocery store, chatted with the neighbors. On the surface, everything looked the same, but under it all, there was a soft hum of reflection. I found myself thinking about the hallway again, not the moment itself, but what it had awakened in me. The realization that connection doesn't end just because youth does. That maybe, just maybe, life still had room to surprise me. Emily and Daniel continued to visit often. They were happy. I could tell. Emily's promotion had given her a new glow, and Daniel seemed proud of her in that quiet, steady way of his. They talked about future plans sometimes, places they might travel, things they wanted to build together. I listened, smiled, and did my best to let them find their own rhythm. But Daniel always made a point to greet me, to ask how my day had been, to thank me for dinner even if he only stayed long enough for dessert. And each time he did, there was something in his eyes, not flirtation, not curiosity, but recognition. as if we shared some small, secret understanding of the world. One Sunday evening, Emily had to leave for a short work trip. She packed her bags, kissed me on the cheek, and said, "Daniel might stop by this week to drop off a few things. I told him he'd be home." I smiled, though my heart flickered for a second. Of course, he's always welcome. That Thursday, I was sitting in the living room with a book when I heard a knock at the door. It was Daniel, just as she'd said. He held a small box in his hands and smiled. "Hey, Mrs. Carter," he said. "Emily left a few of her files at my place. Thought I'd bring them by." "Come in," I said, closing my book. "She'll appreciate it." He stepped inside, the familiar sound of the door clicking shut behind him. I noticed how comfortable he seemed in the house now, not in a presumptuous way, but in that way people do when they've been welcomed enough times to know they belong. I offered him tea, and we sat for a while, talking about simple things, work, the weather, how fast the year was flying by. It felt natural, easy. There was no tension, just a quiet understanding. At one point he asked, "Do you ever miss teaching?" I was surprised. I hadn't talked about that part of my life in years. Every day, I admitted, I loved it. Not just the teaching, but the way you could see something light up in someone when they finally understood something. It made you feel useful. He nodded slowly. "I think that's what I've always admired about people like you and Emily. You build things in others, not for credit, but because it's who you are." That stopped me. Nobody had ever said it quite like that before. It's funny how at certain ages, people start seeing you as a role, a mother, a widow, a neighbor, and stop seeing the person beneath it. But Daniel spoke as if I were still a whole person with thoughts, dreams, and things worth saying. The kettle whistled, breaking the moment. I got up to pour the tea, my hands steady, but my heart oddly full. When I turned back, he was looking at the framed photo of Emily and me on the mantel, the two of us standing by the lake years ago, her arm around my shoulders. "You two have something special," he said softly. "You can see it." I smiled. "We do. She's the best part of me." He met my gaze then, and for a brief moment, there was something unspoken between us, not desire, not confusion, but understanding. The kind that happens when two people see the truth in each other without needing to name it. After tea, he stood to leave. "Tell Emily I dropped these off," he said. "I will." He hesitated by the door. "You know, you should come by the park this weekend," he said. "They're having a community art fair. Emily mentioned you used to paint. You might like it." That caught me off guard. I hadn't picked up a brush in years. "I'll think about it," I said. "You should," he replied. "It'd be good to see you out there." When he left, the house fell quiet again, but it didn't feel empty. His words stayed with me. I walked over to the closet, opened the old wooden box where I used to keep my paints and brushes, and stared at them for a long time. The brushes were stiff, the paints half-dried, but holding them brought back something I'd forgotten, the feeling of creation, of expression, of being alive in a way that had nothing to do with anyone else's needs. That weekend, I went to the art fair. The air was bright and cool, filled with the hum of people and the scent of kettle corn. I wandered among the booths, stopping to admire watercolor landscapes and handmade pottery. And then, unexpectedly, I saw Daniel. He was helping one of the local artists set up a display, sleeves rolled up, focused and kind as always. When he noticed me, his face broke into a warm, surprised smile. "You came," he said. "I did," I replied. "You were right. It's lovely here." He handed me a cup of lemonade and grinned. "I'm glad." We walked through the fair for a while, chatting easily. It felt good, not inappropriate, not uncomfortable, just two people enjoying a sunny afternoon. He asked about my old paintings, and I told him about the seascapes I used to paint years ago, before life became too full of responsibilities. "You should start again," he said gently. "You've got that look, like someone who still has things to say." That line stayed with me for the rest of the day, and that night I went home, cleared the dust off my old easel, and placed a blank canvas on it. I didn't paint anything right away. I just sat there, staring at it, letting the memories settle. For the first time in years, I felt something like anticipation, a quiet spark waiting to catch. It wasn't about Daniel, not really. It was about what he represented, a reminder that connection can be a mirror, showing you the parts of yourself you've neglected. As I finally picked up the brush, I realized that sometimes the most unexpected people come into your life not to stay, but to wake you up. And as the first streak of color spread across the white canvas, I knew I was waking up again. It's strange how quietly life can change. You don't see it coming. There's no grand announcement, no moment where you stop and say, "Ah, here it is, the turning point." It just happens, little by little, until one morning you wake up and realize you're not quite the same person you were before. That's how it felt in the weeks after the art fair. The days grew shorter, the air cooler. Autumn rolled in with its soft gold light and crisp mornings. I found myself spending more time in the spare room, my makeshift studio now, painting again. At first, I was clumsy, unsure. My hands trembled a little, my colors didn't blend the way they used to. But soon muscle memory took over, and something inside me loosened. It wasn't just about the painting. It was about the quiet focus, the solitude that didn't feel like loneliness anymore. It was about rediscovering a voice I thought I'd lost. Emily noticed the change almost immediately. "Mom, these are beautiful," she said one evening, looking at a half-finished landscape on the easel. "You should sell these." I laughed. "Oh, I don't think anyone would buy my old doodles." She shook her head. "You're wrong. People love honesty. And your work. It feels like you mean every stroke." That line touched me more than she probably realized. Maybe she'd gotten that sense of empathy from me after all. Daniel came by a few more times that season, always with Emily, always polite and warm. There was no tension now, no lingering glances or unspoken questions. Whatever had once existed between us had evolved into something simpler, purer. Mutual respect, gratitude. One evening in late October, they invited me to dinner. Emily cooked, Daniel helped set the table, and the three of us sat laughing over burnt lasagna and a bottle of cheap wine. It was one of those nights that felt easy, timeless, like a reminder that love, in all its forms, can be gentle and kind, not just passionate or fleeting. After dinner, as Emily went to clear the dishes, Daniel stayed behind for a moment, helping me fold a napkin that had fallen to the floor. "I saw your painting at the fair last weekend," he said. I blinked in surprise. "You did?" "Yeah, the seascape, the one with the light breaking through the clouds. It was beautiful." I smiled softly. "Thank you. I wasn't sure anyone would notice it." "I did," he said. "It felt hopeful, like someone remembering how to breathe again." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded, and in that moment, I understood what this whole journey had been about. It wasn't about Daniel, not really. It was about what he'd stirred in me, the courage to see myself again, to remember that I was still growing, still learning, still capable of beauty. He'd simply held up a mirror when I'd forgotten how to look. When they left that night, I walked them to the door. Emily hugged me tight, her laughter still bright in the air. Daniel smiled his quiet smile and said, "Take care, Mrs. Carter." "You too, Daniel," I said, "and thank you." He looked like he wanted to ask what I meant, but he didn't. Maybe he already knew. That night, after the house fell silent, I stood in the hallway, that same hallway where everything had begun months before. The same photos lined the walls. Emily growing up, me standing beside her, moments frozen in time. But now, when I looked at them, I didn't feel the ache of years gone by. I felt pride. I felt peace. I thought about how strange it was that sometimes an unexpected person steps into your life not to change it, but to help you remember the strength you already had. Daniel had done that without meaning to, without even realizing it. And Emily, she was my reminder of the love that continues, that never stops evolving. Watching her build her own life filled me with a kind of joy I hadn't known since her father was alive. The house no longer felt too quiet. It felt alive again. I still paint most mornings now. The canvases lean against the walls, each one a little brighter than the last. Sometimes I think about how everything started. A young man standing too long in a hallway, a few kind words, a reflection caught in the stillness of an ordinary night. And I smile, because that's how life works. It sneaks up on you, gently, unexpectedly, and reminds you that you're still here, still capable of being moved, still capable of beginning again. So, if you're watching this now, wherever you are, from Maine to California, I hope you remember that it's never too late to rediscover yourself. Never too late to be seen, to grow, to feel the spark of life again. And if you've made it this far in the story, maybe give this video a little like, maybe subscribe, not just for me, but for yourself, because we all deserve reminders that we're not finished yet. That night in the hallway taught me that, and I'll never forget it.